For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Is it a cabal of radical left-wingers? Yes, it's a cabal of radical left-wingers, and they've been active behind and in front of the scenes increasingly over the last 30 years. And my estimation is that departments like Women's Studies have trained between 300,000 and 3 million radical left-wing activists.
Especially, and these fucking petitions. Oh, this is again you accepting the decision of the vote, just like you complain Donald Trump wouldn't, isn't it? 4 million idiots who literally don't care about your democratic process. 4 million of them.
That relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
So let's go through how a social justice warrior hate mob works. First, they identify a group where they have no influence. And this could be anything from Freemasonry to basketball. That doesn't matter to them. In fact, it really doesn't matter if they're interested in the topic of that group or not. They will demand influence just for the sake of having influence. Now, once they've gotten their foot through the door, they will identify a target. Who or what that target is again irrelevant to them. It only matters to them that you're at the right place at the right time, or at the wrong place at the wrong time, as it were. You have now become a stepping stone for them to gain more power and influence.
On infiltration instead of invasion.
Well, here's the thing. You all heard about the culture war in the 90s. We had these arguments, and actually, this has all happened before. In the early 90s, there was Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin and the McDworkinites and very, very extreme kind of feminism, and humorless and aggressive, and we pushed back. And the New York Times was on our side at that time, New York Magazine, the media, and we won the argument. And we thought, okay, now we've got the alums, and we've got. That wasn't enough, because they quietly assumed the assistant professorships.
Assumed the assistant professorships.
On subversion instead of elections.
Do we have two different groups here that are trying to make two different points, and they find themselves in the same bowl of soup, and that's why this has turned into the conflagration it has?
Well, it's partly that, because the issues we're discussing have to center on some actual issues, and they happen to be centering on the issue surrounding transgender language. But I don't think we're talking past each other at all in a fundamental sense. I mean, I think that the real problem here is that there's a concerted attempt being made by many people to subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome.
To subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome.
On intimidation instead of free choice.
I was being asked, as everyone is, to use a certain set of words that I think are the constructions of people who have a political ideology that I don't believe in, and that I also regard as dangerous.
What are those words?
Those are the made-up words that people now describe as gender neutral, and so to me they're an attempt to control language and in a direction that isn't happening organically. It's not happening naturally. People aren't picking up these words in the typical way that new words are picked up, but by force and by fiat. And I would say by force because there's legislative power behind them.
And I will tell you, this movement with safe rooms and panic attacks and places for them to go because they have PTSD because of their traumas and so forth, I don't really believe that this is about protecting vulnerable people. I see it as a kind of power grab by gender activists. Instead of having to persuade others of the rightness of their cause with evidence and argument and reason, they shame and intimidate them with their psychodramas. And finally, as I will keep saying, I do believe this is just an aggressive assertion of power. And it's a very novel way to do it, to assert your power and your right to prevail, because if people don't do it, they will be, harming your health. And this is very confusing for campus officials, because you're supposed to protect students from threats to their safety and threats to their mental health. But what if it turns out that, intellectual exchange is a threat to their mental well-being?
On guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
And what's the other, you referred to persecution that friends or clients of yours had experienced, such as?
Yeah, well, there are lots of places now where the workplace has become, I would say, excessively politicized, and so people who have viewpoints, and this also includes, I would say, fairly radical leftist viewpoints, people don't feel comfortable at all in being able to use the language of their choice or to have even opinions about a variety of different things. And so, and I've had 3 clients who I would say have been, we'll say, harassed, I suppose is the right way of putting it.
On social media or otherwise?
No, at work, by people who don't like their political opinions, essentially.
First thing I will tell you is that gender studies departments, they have had safe spacers for years. The trigger warnings are new, but hypervigilance, and carrying on in melodrama around women's oppression under patriarchy, and this has been going on for decades. But it wasn't until recently that this, what I'm sort of call feminist melodrama, that it made its way from the gender studies seminars or the women's center. It made its way into the mainstream. What brought rape culture into the mainstream? Now, I've heard that term for years on campus, but I never read it in, Washington Post and so forth. How did that happen? What explains its new prominence in the public square? Well, I believe I know.
It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
But I'm also partly opposed to this because it's been made mandatory and has the whole weight of the law behind it. It's like, this is a very bad idea. I believe this is a very bad idea. And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization. That's what I believe.
And he's absolutely right. The question is, will the minority dictate what the majority has to do? That's the question. Should the minority be able to impose this on the majority? And the answer is, of course, no. Because that's a fucking aristocracy. And you can tell that it's a person's natural resistance to being put under illegitimate authority that Jordan is reacting to.
As the University of Toronto decided to make anti-racism and anti-bias training, so-called anti-racism and anti-bias training, mandatory, which I regarded as an inappropriate incursion into the domain of political opinion by the university administration.
Have you taken that training yet?
No, and I don't have to yet. It's the HR department personnel that have to take it.
If they decide that you have to, will you?
No way. Not a chance.
Okay. And are you prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that. Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
And 3, Jay did not relinquish creative control to anyone. Feminists tried to buy that control and failed. MRAs didn't try, and it wouldn't have done them any good if they had. If Cassie Jay were going to sell out, it only makes sense to me that it would have been for the home team, not the people she had exposing in mind when she started the project. And that brings us to an important point. The real reason feminists are so terrified of this movie. Cassie Jay, a self-identified feminist, got her worldview rocked simply by sitting down and actually listening to what MRAs had to say. Having seen the movie twice, I can tell you that she documented what we had to say and her sometimes turbulent reaction to it with skill and finesse. She also did it with integrity. She would not be bought or bullied. Thus, feminists have no use for her at all. And they have no use for this movie. They also want to decide for the whole world that they have no use for this movie either. Rather, I should say that they want desperately to make sure that no one else sees it. They want to make sure there are no more Cassie Jays in the world. Feminists who, upon reflection of evidence, find themselves no longer being, well, feminist.
A YouTube user by the name of Laughing Witch saw these critiques of popular feminist icons and decided that they were equal to, you guessed it, harassment, even going so far as to say that Thunderfoot, by espousing his opinions on feminists, was leading a hate campaign against women online. Brilliant. So what does Laughing Witch do? So she finds Thunderfoot's real name and job information, which admittedly isn't hard to find, it's public, but nevertheless, sends a letter to his employer, essentially begging for the laboratory that employs Thunderfoot to fire him. Now, this was actually a part of a letter-writing campaign they started online to try and get him fired, but she's really the main person in this story. There's no reason to focus on pedophiles like Bewildered Ape or anybody else. This is a Laughing Witch situation. Now, in the letter, she makes some pretty outlandish claims. She says that Thunderfoot is a Nazi sympathizer, that he commands an army of Nazis, that he hates women, all baseless accusations if you've ever watched a Thunderfoot video in your life. Regardless, that's what happened, that's the situation. So to recap, Thunderfoot has an opinion. Laughing Witch disagrees. Laughing Witch inundates Thunderfoot's employer with letters demanding that he lose his job. Letters fail to do anything. Laughing Witch brags about ruining Thunderfoot's career. Thunderfoot lets the public know what Laughing Witch's company is. Company shuts down, Laughing Witch loses job. I honestly don't understand how she thinks she's the victim here. You're the one who tried to get somebody fired first. Don't act like the victim now that it didn't work and he's retaliating. You took his information and tried to put him out on the streets because you disagreed with his opinion on feminism. You're the one who started this. The fact that you still believe that you're the victim is fucking mesmerizing.
I think that Philip DeFranco and the other people who made videos about me, attacking me on this the past few days, are really seeing this as an opportunity to go in on the narrative that feminists are out to censor people.
What narrative? Feminists do in fact censor people. Have you not heard of the various MRA meetings that are in fact interrupted by feminists to this very day?
This is what men's rights look like! 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 You have a murder! You're fucking dumb! Fuck you! They're fucking pigs! How do you sleep at night, man?
Just another. I just want to listen to someone else's opinion. I'm not even on a side here. I just listen to as many people as I can.
You know what, though? Why would you pay money to fucking support a fucking rape apologist if you weren't fucking one?
Have you not heard that some feminists go out their way to silence people at their job because they have a different opinion?
So this message was sent to the institute where I work some time ago, and I'll come back to why I'm reading this in a second. I strongly urge you to check into the behaviours and statements of Mr. Flip Mason, spelled my name wrong by the way, also known as Thunderfoot on YouTube and online. I've recently been made aware that Mr. Mason has been using his position in your institute to promote hatred of different groups and to justify genocide. He has openly stated on his YouTube channel and in debate that he participated in his sympathy for the Nazi genocide. Bollocks. His position within your institute leads me to believe that your institute may also hold such sympathies.
What about the fact that Anita Sarkeesian went to the UN and asked the UN to remove videos about her? Feminism is in fact censoring